The mysterious disappearance of D.B. Cooper. Imagine boarding a commercial flight, sitting beside an ordinary businessman, only to discover mid-air that he has a bomb. Now imagine that man demands $200,000, parachutes from the plane into a stormy night, and is never seen again. More than 50 years later, the FBI still doesn't know who he was. This is the incredible true story of D.B. Cooper, the only skyjacker in American history who vanished without a trace. On the afternoon of November 24, 1971, Thanksgiving Eve, a quiet man walked into Portland International Airport. He looked completely ordinary, around 40 years old, wearing a dark business suit, a white shirt, black tie, polished shoes, and carrying nothing more than a black briefcase. He purchased a one-way ticket on Northwest Orient Airlines Flight 305, traveling from Portland, Oregon to Seattle, Washington. The ticket was bought under the name Dan Cooper. Due to an early reporting mistake, newspapers later called him D.B. Cooper, and that name would become legendary. After boarding the Boeing 727, Cooper calmly took his seat near the back of the aircraft. He ordered a bourbon and soda, lit a cigarette, something passengers were allowed to do in 1971, and quietly observed the cabin. Nothing about him appeared suspicious. A few minutes after takeoff, Cooper handed a folded note to flight attendant Florence Schaffner. Assuming it was just another passenger trying to flirt, she slipped it into her purse without reading it. Cooper leaned toward her and quietly said, "Miss, you'd better read that note. I have a bomb." Her heart nearly stopped. The note demanded her attention immediately. Then Cooper opened his briefcase just enough for her to see what looked like red cylinders connected by wires and a battery. Whether it was a real bomb or a convincing fake remains unknown to this day. Keeping his voice calm, Cooper gave his demands. He wanted $200,000 in cash, 4 parachutes, and a fuel truck waiting in Seattle. If anyone tried to trick him, he warned the consequences would be catastrophic. As Flight 305 continued toward Seattle, police officers quietly gathered the ransom money. Every bill was carefully photographed so it could be traced later. Meanwhile, Cooper remained astonishingly calm. He wasn't shouting, he wasn't threatening passengers. He simply sat in his seat, smoking cigarettes, sipping his drink, and waiting. To everyone on board, he looked less like a desperate criminal and more like a man following a carefully planned mission. But no one could have imagined that the most unbelievable part of the story was still about to begin. When Flight 305 finally landed in Seattle, the airport was surrounded by FBI agents, police officers, and emergency crews. But from inside the cabin, everything appeared strangely calm. Following Cooper's instructions, the airline delivered $200,000 in cash, equivalent to well over $1 million today, along with 4 parachutes. Once he confirmed everything was on board, Cooper released all 36 passengers. Only the flight crew remained. Then came his final command. The plane was to fly toward Mexico City at a low altitude, with the landing gear partially lowered and the rear stairway ready for use. Although the pilots warned that these conditions were highly unusual, the Boeing 727 was one of the few aircraft capable of flying that way. At 7:40 p.m., the plane took off again into a cold, stormy night. Rain pounded the aircraft, powerful winds shook the cabin, visibility was almost zero. Somewhere over the forests of the Pacific Northwest, Cooper instructed the crew to stay inside the cockpit and close the door. Minutes later, the cockpit crew noticed a sudden change in air pressure. The aircraft briefly lurched upward. They knew exactly what had happened. The rear stairs had been opened. Somewhere in the darkness at nearly 10,000 feet, D.B. Cooper jumped from the plane carrying the ransom money. No one saw him leave. No one heard him land. He simply vanished. The FBI immediately launched one of the largest manhunts in American history. Thousands of soldiers, police officers, helicopters, and search teams combed forests, rivers, and mountains for weeks. They found nothing. No body, no parachute, no briefcase, no clothing, nothing. Years turned into decades, and the mystery only grew. In 1980, a young boy digging along the Columbia River discovered nearly $5,800 of the ransom money buried in the sand. The serial numbers matched the bills Cooper had received. It was the first and only confirmed piece of physical evidence ever recovered. But it raised even more questions. If Cooper died during the jump, where was the rest of the money? If he survived, why was part of the ransom buried along the river? Over the years, the FBI investigated more than 800 suspects. Former soldiers, skydivers, pilots, and career criminals were all considered possible matches. Yet none could be conclusively identified as D.B. Cooper. After 45 years of investigation, the FBI officially suspended the case in 2016, admitting there were no new leads strong enough to continue. To this day, no one knows whether Cooper survived the jump or died somewhere in the wilderness. Was he an elite military parachutist, a brilliant criminal who escaped forever, or simply a lucky man whose true identity disappeared into history? More than half a century later, the legend of D.B. Cooper continues to fascinate millions. It remains the only unsolved skyjacking in American history and one of the greatest mysteries the United States has ever known. Because sometimes, the most impossible stories are the ones that are true. Please like, share, and subscribe. Thank you.